her. Our speaker tonight is Erin S. She's currently assistant professor of anthropology here at the university and hopefully promoted soon. She came to actually to tell you a little bit about her background. She's from Missouri originally, and then went to the University of North Carolina, which is where I went to school. And I actually first went to Missouri myself and my wife there. So Erin and I kind of paralleled each other with 30 years apart there. So, and both ended up here in South Alabama. So her interests are quite diverse. She does studies foodways, has a really great article recently about the uses of ash in native cooking, which is an interesting topic that people haven't really thought too much about until today. Studies domestic architecture, did a lot of work on Mississippian mound sites in Mississippi, and that's her specialty that she'll be talking about today. Her newest project, which is focusing on the Pensacola expression of Mississippian, the coastal Mississippian complex that we have in this area. And it's a huge topic. Powell Creek, the most famous site is the big mound site up in the Delta. If you haven't been, you should go. It's a spectacular place to visit. But amazingly little work has been done on Mississippi. And so we're really looking forward to her talk tonight, but also her long-term project in that realm. So, Erin, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Greg. How's the volume? Everybody hear me? Good? Okay, great. Good. Well, thank you for being here tonight, everybody. Thank you, Greg, for that great introduction, and thank you to Jen for setting all of this up. As Greg said, I've been a faculty member here in the anthropology program since 2017. Before that, I did my graduate work at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Taught there for a year before coming here. So I've always done my research in the interior. Most of my archaeological experience has been in the interior, so it's kind of an adjustment to come and work on the coast, and I'll sort of be telling you about how I made that adjustment. I wanted to start by giving a little bit of context, a little bit of background about my interest in Native communities. Also introduce some key archaeological sites that we have here on the North Coast. And then I'll transition into talking about some of the recent projects I've been working on, including USA's Field School at the Dooley Creek site, and a new project where I'm using pottery to try and understand how networks of potters contributed to the development of a coastal Mississippian variant that we call Pensacola. So how did those potters interact with each other, and how did that lead to the new types of communities that formed here during the Mississippi period? And so my research as a whole focuses on these recent Native American communities, particularly Mississippian communities that lived in the American South starting from about the mid-12th century. So here are some scenes from my dissertation work in Mississippi, and I'll just say briefly that this is really where this is really the work that led me to think deeply about Native American communities, how they're organized, what it means to be a part of a community. And I tend to focus on three main kinds of data to help me think through these questions. So first, I'm interested in the ways that people organize space. So you'll see in the middle photo here, this is a map that's made using a magnetic gradiometer that can map underground features that have particular magnetic properties. So using these kinds of tools, we can kind of see what is underground. In this case, you can see how people arrange their houses. If we were going to zoom out and look at the site as a whole, you can see that there are lots of these arrangements in different neighborhoods around the site. And so this is really great archaeological data if you're interested in communities, because it tells you how people are living, how they relate to each other, what kind of interactions they might have had on a daily basis, and things like that. And incidentally, what I found was that this arrangement is very similar to the way that Western Muskogean people organized their towns and their spaces in the historic era. So it's also able to make an analogy, which is also really useful if you're interested in communities. So I'm also interested in monumental architecture, how people modify their landscapes in particular ways. One example, and this is a nod to one of Greg's projects, I've got my field school students here standing in an ancient canoe canal that was built by the woodland people. So landscape modifications have been taking place for a really long time. I'm interested in that, and also how people are, just living, arranging themselves on the landscape and moving around. And then finally, as Greg said, I'm interested in foodways. So I'm interested in how people use food to either say, hey, we're all the same, we share an identity, or alternatively, how people make distinctions among themselves by using food. So how do we say, hey, I'm not like you? So how do people project their identity through food, basically? And then my newest project adds in pottery. This is also related to foodways, but in this case, I'm now looking at some of the more technological aspects of how people make pottery and what that says about learning communities. So what kind of knowledge are people passing on to people that they are teaching to make pottery? In other cases, are people trying to copy designs while not actually learning from the person who made the pottery, etc. So what can that tell us about how potters relate to each other and how communities form based on that? Okay, and then finally, before I jump in, I'll just add that the Mississippian people that I studied were the ancestors of modern Native American people that we know as Creeks and Choctaws and Chickasaws and many others who you're familiar with, and all of whom have pretty deep, ancestral ties to the South. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, and to also include modern descendants of the Native people that I study in conversations and collaborations surrounding the work that I'm doing. So I'll say a bit more throughout the talk about some collaborative projects with the Porch Creek Indians, the Muskogee Creek Nation, and with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma that I also have in the works. Okay, so oops, there's my book. Okay, so the Monumental Delta has frequently been called a fulcrum of cultural interaction, with local people influencing and being influenced by their connections with coastal people to the east and to the west, and also with people living in the interior, especially what is now West Central Alabama, and even as far away as the Mississippi Valley. So people are really coming in and out of here. This was true in the era prior to European contact, and it remained true after the region was colonized by the Spanish and the French. In 1702, the French governor of Louisiana sent his brother, Bienville, to examine abandoned Native American settlements in and around Mobile Bay. And Bienville had a Mobilian Indian guide with him. So he asked this guy to show him the place where their gods are. And the guide took him to the site that we now call Bottle Creek, which Greg mentioned. So this is a site. Nope. Yeah. Oh. Okay. So this is a site about which all the neighboring nations make such a fuss, and to which the Mobilians used to come and offer sacrifices. This is real speaking. So this was clearly a sacred place, a powerful place. Perhaps it was even a dangerous place for the Mobilians. Bienville's guide actually refused to set foot on the site or even to look at it. And then when Bienville stole 5 ceramic statues from the temple on the top of one of the mounds, probably Mount A, if you imagine, Iberville writes the Indians were amazed at our boldness and amazed that we do not die as a result. So local people in the early 18th century certainly had a sense of reverence for the site, and it turns out that was not only true of local people. So nearly 20 years later, the Natchez Indians, who were living in the lower Mississippi Valley near present-day Natchez, Mississippi, they told another Frenchman, Charlevoix, that when any of their fires happened to be extinguished through chance or negligence, it was necessary to kindle them again at theirs, referring to the Mobilians' fire. So in order to rekindle their fire, the Natchez actually had to travel, 400 or so kilometers from the lower Mississippi Valley to Mobile Bay, and we think probably to the site of Bottle Creek. So Bottle Creek, which was founded about 1150 AD, was still a really significant place for local people and also a place of pilgrimage to people from the Natchez region of Mississippi nearly 600 years after it was built. So this site has a long history as well. Another site I want to mention, this is 90 kilometers south of Bottle Creek on Dauphin Island. This is the location of a Pensacola culture shell mound. In 1922, a flint clay pipe depicting a crayfish was unearthed by a local man here. This is one of nearly 100 of these flint clay figurines that are known from various sites across eastern North America. So it was carved almost 1,000 kilometers away at the site of Cahokia in the 12th century AD. So the crayfish form is, it's actually unique among this sample that we have of 100. And we think it probably is tied to the crayfish in the earth diver origin story, which you can hear in various versions that are told by the Creek, the Yuchi, the Osage, the Shawnee, and others. So in the story, the crayfish dives down to the bottom of the primordial waters and brings up sand or mud from the bottom to form the surface of the earth. So the burial of this crayfish pipe on the Gulf Coast, speaks to this connection, to the connection of this location where the water meets the land to Mississippian people throughout the woodland, the eastern woodlands. Just as the fire that was nourished by Gulf Coast people connected them to the Natchez in the early 18th century. So we have a lot of meaningful objects here, right? We have stolen statues, living fire, flint clay pipes that all underline the significance that coastal people and coastal places had to the broader context of the Mississippian phenomenon. And yet, even the most recent considerations of Mississippian expansion across eastern North America tend to overlook the Gulf Coast. So you'll see it's missing from this map here. There's nothing really in the Gulf Coast region. We do in fact have a Pensacola, or we do in fact have a coastal Mississippian variant, which archaeologists call the Pensacola culture. So despite the fact that we very obviously have a Mississippian component down here, it's often left off of maps such as this one. In some ways, this is understandable. There's not a lot of published literature on the Gulf Coast. But I also think that the Pensacola variant is overlooked because it differs pretty substantially from some of the classic Mississippian expressions in the interior. So when we talk about Mississippian cultures, archaeologists are referring to people who lived in the American South and Midwest beginning around AD 1050, when a really diverse group of people came together in the American Bottom, so up near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, East St. Louis, Illinois. And they founded a site called Cahokia. Cahokia is where this flint clay pipe that I mentioned was manufactured. And by the way, you can see a replica of the crayfish pipe in the museum. So if you haven't done that, be sure to go in there and check it out. There's sort of this diverse kind of multicultural group of people who formed a new community and a new way of life in this place this lifestyle kind of spread across a large geographic area after that time. So historically, archaeologists have identified Mississippian populations using a range of distinctive material traits: construction of flat-topped pyramidal mounds and formalized plazas, settlement hierarchies, rectangular wall trench structures, reliance on maize agriculture, well-tempered pottery, which we're going to get into a lot more, and also a suite of important political and religious symbols. So this combination of diagnostic traits is viewed as culminating in polities, or chiefdoms they're sometimes called, that were definitively agricultural, socially hierarchical, and politically centralized. So this is kind of the template that we have for Mississippian societies. And of course, the only problem with definitions like this is that not all Mississippian cultures sort of match up exactly with these definitions. So some of them don't make shell-tempered pottery, some don't have the right kind of settlement pattern, some don't rely on maize agriculture, some of them don't even appear to be all that hierarchical. So our coastal Mississippian variant, which again we call Pensacola, definitively contains really just 3 of these, I would say. We have platform mound and plaza construction at Ball Creek and a small number of other sites. Shell-tempered pottery, which is how we recognize it sort of as it spreads out. And also iconographic motifs that are linked with Mississippian political and religious symbolism. All of these things, plus more, plus really all of the other things, do appear at Bottle Creek. So when we think about Mississippian sites in and around Mobile Bay, this is the site that we think about. It's the first, it's the biggest, it's the one that we know the most about. It's also regarded by a lot of people to be the principal political and religious center for the whole region. So the capital of a chiefdom, in other words. And there's no doubt it's a very important site. But I do think that we need to look at all the other sites and think about the whole pattern, really before we start talking about how people organize themselves throughout the entire region. So it's not at all clear what the total settlement pattern was like or how well integrated some of these smaller Pensacola sites were with Bottle Creek, especially as we get away from Mobile Bay. So in the absence of really reliable settlement data or even a very good sense of site organization at Bottle Creek itself, I'm not really sure that we can make these inferences about how centralized it was politically, or whether it controlled a social hierarchy for the entire region, even though we do know that Bottle Creek was very important for local people. So, you know, I think one of the reasons that we, you know, well, okay, so we have all these Mississippian societies that don't exactly fit the pattern we expect. And I think that the fact that we know so much about Bottle Creek and so little about other Pensacola sites, and also the fact that Bottle Creek does fit the broader sort of Mississippian pattern that we expect, these circumstances kind of color our interpretations a little bit in ways that kind of mask all the variation that that we categorize as Mississippian and that we categorize as Pensacola. So my idea is to try to come at this idea of communities, but without some of the preconceived notions about what we're going to find in advance. So when I started at, oops, I think I was already supposed to be on that one. Well, here's Bottle Creek. So when I started my job at the University of South Alabama, I didn't really know anything about Pensacola culture. It quickly became really clear that the Mobile-Tinson Delta and the adjacent coastal areas is just really an embarrassment of archaeological riches. And although a lot of work has been done, we've really just barely scratched the surface of what is out there. So I'm thinking, you know, I know how to study Mississippian communities. I'm going to get a bunch of geophysical equipment out there. I'm going to map all these coastal sites. I'm going to learn about site layout and how they're organizing their communities, and I'm really going to figure this thing out. But I just have to tell you that went very poorly. Some of my students who back down into the field of some of these geophysical surveys are not ignorant. But it just, there are lots of reasons for it. Coastal sites are very sandy, so there's not a lot of contrast between sandy archaeological features and sandy soil. Also, you have a lot of groundwater, the tidal situation that's kind of affecting moisture and that kind of stuff. There's also a lot of development in many coastal areas, so there's a lot of waste from modern debris. So it's kind of just one failure after the next. But the technical reasons aren't the only reason why it wasn't really very successful. And the other major reasons because Pensacola people don't build the same kind of houses. We think that people in other parts of the Mississippi world did. So they don't build these wattle and daub houses out of clay and fire them like you saw in the magnetometry image that I showed you in the beginning. They're much, I mean, aside from Bottle Creek, I actually don't know of any Mississippi period house structures that we have on archaeological sites here. So that leads me to believe that they're just very lightly built. They're more temporary structures, you know, they've got to resist hurricanes and all sorts of things. So they just don't, there are cultural reasons why the geophysics is not as successful here as well. So, let me see if I can find my place now. Okay, so, you know, I was sort of just like, what am I going to do now? I don't know how I'm going to study communities if I don't have the types of archaeological data that I'm really used to using and that's really good for understanding how people organize themselves. And this is also really important to me. Archaeology for a long time was really focused on things like chronologies and artifacts, and I'm really more interested in thinking about people and their relationships. So I started to think about this. You know, how am I going to understand Mississippian communities on the coast? And this gets me to thinking about, you know, not only what we don't have here to work with, but really what we do have to work with. And what we do have here in abundance is pottery. Oops, I'm just off my slides. Let me do that. Okay, so I started thinking about pottery, what pottery can tell us about relationships between people, and as I started to learn more about it, this really interesting problem began to take shape, which has to do with the origins and the later development of the Pensacola tradition, and what role pottery, and more importantly, what potters had to do with it. So I will say, still on Bottle Creek, so I'll say one more thing about Bottle Creek before I move on. And that is that Bottle Creek is really the type site for the Bottle Creek phases, which is basically the phase concept is kind of how archaeologists tell time using ceramics, right? We know that they change in particular ways over time. Once you figure out what the sequence is at one site, you can use it to date other sites and so forth. So in the early 1990s, a team from the University of Alabama, led by Dr. Ian Brown, actually, Dr. Wozakov was involved in this as well, especially the mapping component of the work at Bottle Creek. But Dr. Brown and his team conducted 2 seasons of excavation at Bottle Creek. And he writes in his introduction to the volume that resulted from this work that the ceramic sample from Mount C those excavations alone produced more pottery than all the excavated sites in Bobo Bay put together. So this is really the Rosetta Stone for helping us understand how we tell time using pottery. So this sample, as well as those that were excavated from mounds A and D, allowed Rick Fuller to develop a detailed ceramic typology, which you see here, and to work out a relative chronology for Pensacola culture ceramics from roughly about AD 1100 to AD 1700. And notably, Fuller was able to distinguish, I don't know if you can see that, can you see the pink there? It allowed him to, or he was able to distinguish 3 distinct Pensacola culture phases. So he names these Bottle Creek 1, Bottle Creek 2, which are middle Mississippian and late Mississippian, respectively, and then the Bear Point phase, which dates to the 16th and 17th centuries. And then Fuller also found that the earliest in situ deposits at Bottle Creek included mound pottery texts that are common at Moundville, which is up near Tuscaloosa, and to a lesser extent, pottery types that are local to the lower Mississippi Valley. So Fuller named this the Andrews Place complex, and he considered this to be what archaeologists call a site unit intrusion. He thinks that this represents movement of people from the Moundville polity in the Blackwater Valley, perhaps also people from the lower Mississippi Valley, a movement of people from those places to Bobo Bay. So this complex is found at Bottle Creek. It's also found at a site called Andrews Place on Porter's Bay, as well as several salt processing sites on the lower Tombigbee. So this leads Fuller and Brown and Ashley Dumas and some others to argue that salt procurement was a major motivation for Mississippi people coming down initially into lower Alabama. And what we know, links between Pensacola culture and Moundville have been noted for a really long time, but this sort of confirmation that non-local Mississippian people initiated the culture change that came after is significant for understanding Pensacola as kind of a hybrid, a hybrid cultural formation, right? So people from different backgrounds and lifestyles, different environments, coming together and creating kind of a new lifestyle on the Gulf Coast. So the story of chronology is critical in helping us understand how Pensacola sites relate to one another, and it's really this work that the work of myself and my colleagues are building on. So, as I said, one prominent theory is that Pensacola got started, originated with the migration of people from the Moundville area near Tuscaloosa, shortly after Moundville itself was founded in about AD 1120. They founded Bottle Creek. They started interacting with Lake Woodland people who were already living here. And the most tangible evidence of this migration is actually the pottery that they brought with them. So it's easily distinguishable from the local Gulf Coast pottery tradition because the Mississippian pottery is tempered with shell. So, and that's not the only reason. There are some surface decorations and other things that also link it to Moundville. So in terms of designs and motifs and what the pottery actually looks like on the surface. And again, not only pottery is coming from Moundville, pottery is also coming from the lower Mississippi Valley. So when people I'll do my best. Okay, so we think that people came here from elsewhere. They brought their pottery with them, and with them also, in addition to pottery, they brought a lot of new ideas. So these are Mississippian ideas, and the sort of the going theory says that lots of things changed here as a result. So one of these examples is settlement patterns. I hope you can see this. I've got woodland sites, which is the major period preceding the Mississippian period, in orange and red, and then the Mississippian sites are in like a light blue that may be difficult to see. So this is all the sites, and then if you take away the woodland sites, you leave the Mississippian sites behind, so you can really see, if you look back and forth, that there's a real difference in the Mississippian settlement pattern from the preceding woodland period. So they're moving down basically into the bottomlands of the delta. But on the coast, it's a little bit different. There are both woodland sites and Mississippian sites on the coast, but where the pattern is really dramatic is up. So that's one thing that is happening. It's probably related to corn agriculture. Mississippian people brought maize with them as well, or perhaps it was already here, but it was more important to Mississippian people. The bottomlands have good agricultural soils, so that's one possibility. Okay, so by about AD 1200, this happens. Bottle Creek is founded about 1150, AD 1150. By about AD 1250, shell-tempered pottery, Pensacola, which we call Pensacola pottery, have really spread out through the delta and the coastal zones adjacent to Mobile Bay. Now, one thing I'll point out is that it's possible that these sites are contemporary, right? Or some of them are. So one possibility is that people continue making the regular, woodland pottery in the uplands, but pretty much everybody who's living in the lowlands sort of switches to the shell-tempered pottery. I'm not sure what exactly is going on there. So by AD 1250s, the shell-tempered pottery has spread throughout the delta, throughout the coastal zone, and at some point it also spreads along the coast as far west as the Mississippi River in southeastern Louisiana. where it's found within kind of mixed assemblages with the local pottery types. And it's found as far east as Choctawhatchee Bay in the Florida Panhandle, where it also forms kind of mixed assemblages with their local pottery type. So we've got a lot of pottery, we've got a good idea of distribution, and we have this theory that the Mississippian sort of thing on the coast was kind of kicked off by these other people who came down. So we understand kind of the broad distribution of this stuff, right? But we don't really understand the mechanisms of the diffusion. We don't understand the nature of social interactions or ideological transformations or formations of new identities, right? So a major question that I would like to answer is, or that I would like to ask, I guess, hopefully I could answer, is just how connected Pensacola communities were with one another and with Bottle Creek. Given that the Pensacola expression stretched along more than 400 kilometers of the northern Gulf Coast and incorporated multiple distinct communities. So throughout this area, we know that people kind of created hybrid cultures by adopting some Mississippian traits, but also retaining much of their existing kind of coastal lifestyle. And yet, as I said before, we frequently interpret Pensacola through a very Mississippian kind of hierarchical political lens, socio-political lens. And most of this has to do with people saying that Bottle Creek is the capital of the chiefdom and it's kind of calling the shots for these other areas. I'm simplifying this. There are other people who put some nuance into the story. But that's generally the pattern. So what I did was I teamed up with some colleagues from the University of Florida Ceramics Technology Lab, Lindsay Block and Neil Wallace in particular. We just got a grant from the National Science Foundation to study how the production and use of Pensacola pottery kind of facilitated different types of connections among Pensacola potters. So here's, actually I should have showed you this before. So rather than kind of assuming that Pensacola people shared a particular political identity or affiliation, we planned to actually examine the structures of various Pensacola relationships using a social network analysis approach that relies on various attributes of pottery to try and figure out the relationships among potters who are making pottery. So this work, here's the pottery, I'm still behind the slides. Okay, so this work involves some recent fieldwork projects I've been involved in at places like Duluth Creek and the McKinnis site. You can see some of our volunteers. Apologies to those whose butts are in the air. Sorry, Lori. McKinnis, but also we're mainly using legacy ceramic collections. So this is pottery that's been excavated from sites in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. So I just want to say a little bit about the Duluth Creek project, and then I'll talk more about our collections research and how we want to use pottery to think about social networks. And also, Jen, I meant to bring my phone up here. I don't have my eye on the time. So if you could keep an eye on it for me, that would be great. Can you do that? Thank you. Okay, so the Duluth Creek sites have the dubious distinction of being located in the right-of-way of Interstate Highway 10 Bayway. So in advance of the construction of that highway in the 1970s, crews from the Alabama Museum of Natural History conducted about 6 months of salvage excavations there in the Department of Transportation's right-of-way. In 2018, the University of South Alabama Center for Archaeological Studies did some testing and excavations here in advance of the Mobile River Bridge and Bayway widening project. And they'll also be out there at these sites again. I think I heard April, maybe even earlier, something like that. So there's going to be a lot more work done at these sites. This is a early 1970s aerial before the Bayway was put in. And when these sites were still fairly intact, what happened, you can't tell it from that, but what happened as they put the highway in, they rechanneled Dilly Creek and basically took out most of the site. So we have remnants on either side now. And the Center for Archaeological Studies is going to be working out there to salvage really what is left within the right of way. This is also the location where I have held the USA Field School since 2018. So the field, there's some photos of happy students in these photos, which I like to show. All of you students in the audience, I promise it's a very fun experience. All these people are happy. But this our field school has been in collaboration with the Porch Band of Creek Indians. And we've got some Porch students here. That's Billy over on the right. He has since graduated and now is working in the Tribal Historic Preservation Office at Porch. So we're going to hopefully continue this collaboration. We're also going to bring some middle and high school students from Porch out this summer to spend a week excavating. And so this is one of these collaborative projects that I was mentioning before. And Dr. Phil Carr is going to be in charge of coordinating this. So thank you. Okay, so also if you're a student and you're interested in taking the field school, I've got the course numbers up here, so make note of that. AN 335 is the sort of first version that you would take. And then if you want to take it again, you can take the upper division course. Okay, Jen tells me I have 5 minutes, so let me keep going. Okay, so I will not say much about what we found at Dilly Creek in the interest of brevity, but I will mention 2 or 3 points. So the first is that this is a really dynamic landscape. What you're looking at here is strata that are composed of midden, 1, 2, 3, and then they're separated by these really thick, in some cases, deposits of sand. I had a geoarchaeologist out there, Howard Sear, who was sort of helping me interpret this. Again, I haven't done a lot of work on the coast until just a few years ago, but he thinks that these were deposited by high velocity storm events, so hurricanes. And they actually changed the shape of the channel of Dilly Creek. And so we were able to do some sort of landscape reconstructions to figure out where these different channels were at different points. The second thing I'll mention about Dilly Creek is that Mississippian people and later 16th and 17th century sort of colonial Native American people, but in the colonial era, used these sites differently. So up in the northern part of the site, this is the part of the site that's all gone now. So none of this is left. There's a little bit of the site left here, and then 251 up there. But the pottery is different. So Mississippian people are living up here, doing their activities up here. Bear Point, the colonial era people are, their pottery is all down here. And there's not really a lot of mixing between them. There's a little bit, but not a lot. So they're using the landscape in different ways, which I think is interesting and I would like to know more about. Okay, so let me talk, oh boy, just talking. Okay, I'll move on to sort of back to the big picture. So I was saying a minute ago that we are trying to figure out how the production and use of Pensacola pottery facilitated different connections among Pensacola people. And we don't want to assume that we know what these relationships were like ahead of time. So we're basically using 4 different types of attributes. Elemental composition, which will hopefully tell us where the pottery is made. We're going to look at techno-functional aspects, including temper and vessel shape and size, which have bearing on what you can use the pot for. So for instance, shell temper improves the thermal shock, the resistance of thermal shock for pots that you might want to use to boil maize for long periods of time, which is what they're doing. So we're going to look at things like temper, vessel shape and size, and then we're also going to look at how they're decorated and what kind of iconography and symbolism they use. So I'll sort of skip the details of that, except to say that we think the Gulf Coast is going to be a really good place to do this elemental composition analysis because of the number of rivers that flow into the bay. So our our hypothesis is that these different river valleys are going to have different elemental compositions between them. And so we're going to be able to tell in a broad sense where pottery was made, where the clay was sourced, and then if it's found, in a place that's different, but it doesn't match, right, then we're going to be able to say something about how pottery moves. So let me skip here. Okay, so I have some examples, some very simple examples of what these kind of networks could possibly look like. And we expect these to reveal networks of Pensacola potters that kind of differ in structure and scale based on these different characteristics. So elements might tell us one thing about how people are connected, and the way that they decorate their pottery on the outside might tell us something totally different. So that's the idea that we're going for. We haven't done it yet, so we don't know what our networks are going to look like. So I put up this example of someone who has done similar work in North Georgia. This is from Jake Mulowitz's work. And basically what he's got here are the red dots and stars are, and actually there's some blue ones too, are archaeological sites. We call these nodes in network speak. And then the lines that connect them, which are ties in network speak, are measures of the how similar the pottery between the two sites. And you can see what he's done is kind of mapped how the networks change over time. So if you look here, you have a bunch of sites, they look all kind of the same size, they're all kind of connected to one another, kind of interconnected with one another, right? By the time you get to this time period, one of these sites, this is Etowah, a major site in Georgia, has kind of emerged as a regional, really important, big political and religious center. And you can see that because not only is it connected to all of these sites, but it's pulling in all of these as well. So this is the kind of thing that we are hoping to be able to do. I won't bore you with this. These are some speculations about what we might find. Right now we're doing collections research. So again, we haven't done the network comparison yet. We do have some kind of a few ideas about what we're going to be finding. These are some students who are involved as well as the archaeology volunteers working at the chemists. So thank you to all of these people making this happen. And some things we learned. I'll be very brief about this. This is probably the most important thing. Tulane has the best faculty offices. So Chris Rodney is an archaeologist. He's actually a Mobile native. I've seen his family's name on the gallery at the library or various other places around town. He's got a nice little balcony that he never uses, I might add. It's completely covered in pine needles. So that was an important finding. This is an assumption because we haven't done the elemental analysis yet, but it really, really does look like Pensacola pottery is moving around a lot. So we have examples of pottery that just looks like it was made in Mobile Bay based on the paste characteristics, temper, the designs. That's found, up near Selma, over near Lake Pontchartrain, and we have pottery. We should expect this. We found this at Bottle Creek, but that's coming into Mobile Bay from places like the lower Mississippi Valley and from Moundville near Tuscaloosa. So I think the elemental analysis is going to show us that this really is what's happening. We also found that there are a lot more sites with Pensacola materials at the fringes of our study area than we expected. So here are a number of sites in Archaeology Bay that have Pensacola pottery. Some additional ones that have either shell tempered or Pensacola pottery near Lake Pontchartrain in southeast Louisiana. I am learning about sites every day. Chip McGinsey, who's the Louisiana State archaeologist, sent me that picture along with some other pictures of sherds just earlier today. So this really is going to be a much bigger sample than I think we're thinking we would have, which is great. And finally, movement of Pensacola pottery and potters happens, I think, frequently, maybe a lot more often than we thought. It wasn't just, development in Mobile Bay and then it spread out from there. This is sort of a more complicated, long-term interaction. So, for instance, the Johnson site has pottery that we would date to around 1400 here, Bottle Creek phase, while the Sim site has pottery that we would date to the Barren Point phase, so probably after 1550. So these are going to be some interesting things that we're going to sort out, hopefully with lots of new radio programming. And then finally, the very last thing that I want to mention is another of these collaborations that we have going on. So we did consult with many, I think about 19, I remember was about 19 Native American tribes who have ancestral ties to the region. It's a big region, so there are lots of people involved. And many of the tribal historic preservation officers were very supportive of the work, very interested in the work, and interested in helping us out and collaborating with us. So as one final example of community building, I just want to tell you about one of these collaborations that I'm excited about. There are a number of Choctaw potters who were very interested in revitalizing their traditional Choctaw pottery and traditional foodways. Including Dr. Ian Thompson, who's the Choctaw Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. So there are several potters already making traditional pottery from materials that are sourced from Choctaw homelands, but none of them have ever worked with raw materials from the Gulf Coast. So we came up with a plan to source materials here, to get them out to the homelands so that they can work with them, which they're very interested in doing. They want to make the pottery, fire it, cook dishes, and then all this sorts of stuff that can tell us about what it's like to use these materials and maybe how it differs from the materials that they've used that are not from the coast, right? So this is a sort of a mutually beneficial collaboration, I think. I'm not a potter myself, so I have partnered with a local guy, Zach Sierke. He's from Fairhope. He knows a lot about all of the clay, sort of local native clay sources here. And so we're actually going to bring Choctaw potters here, take them out to the clay sources, visit some archaeological sites, look at some pottery. They're going to do a firing demonstration. This is all thanks to the Social Justice Research Initiative that USA has going right now, so it's funded through that. But there is going to be a public outreach component to this, so we don't have dates yet, but stay tuned on the museum Facebook page and other social media for announcements about that. And since I have spoken for a very long time, I will leave it there. But I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.